Okay, and we're back, and welcome to Soul Talk on Saturday morning. Um, Thank you for listening, guys. Had a really cool week. I hope you all did as well. There's some things that I want to talk about before we bring our guest on today. Our guest is Lisette Larkins, I'm sorry, and she is the author of 3 books, which I'll be talking about here shortly. The book we're going to be talking about is "Difficult People: A Gateway to Enlightenment," but I'll give you more of a description on that here in just a little bit. Um, there's just I as you know from last week's show, I got a little bit sick, and I'm still a little bit sick this week. I want to tell you how amazing my week was because I had the opportunity to take 7 days off from everything, from my job and from the only thing I did is this show, and I got to connect to a very wonderful woman last week as well. But what I did is spent that time with myself. I went out to the movies and out to the dinner, here a couple times, but mainly, partially because I wasn't feeling good, but the other reason is because I hadn't taken any time for myself in a very, very long time. And I remember telling my roommate that this has been incredible for me. I've been really, really happy with the fact that I could take this time to just rest, meditate, be into myself. And he had said, well, that gets old after a while. And I said, well, I think that there's a balance. We need to have a balance of interaction with people and also balance with being with ourselves and spending that time with ourselves. And so, we don't want to be all the way the hermit because we need that social interaction with other souls. And those other souls mirror things back to us to help us grow in the self-awareness that we're here to experience. And, that was really cool to me because I really, that's something that, we talk about in books and we talk about in classes, but you got to really stop and think about that. Most of us give more time to all the other things going on in our lives, our jobs, our projects, our family, and anything in our lives. But we don't take enough time for ourselves. And like I said, this is stated in books all over the place, but you have to practice it. And and I practice it some, and then I get off balance with it, and then I practice it some. And being sick is my body saying it's time to slow down. And so, metaphorically and metaphysically, I've been going through a lot of blocks and transmuting a lot of things in my body from old patterns. Well, when you really think about it, we're full of congestion because we block the flow within our bodies. The Chinese talk about the flow of the energy meridians, and if we don't allow that godlike flow to come through us, that consciousness to flow through us, then there is something blocking it. And those blocks are thought patterns. They could be old things that we haven't even thought about, something that happened to us when we were 6 years old. Well, we haven't looked at it. Well, I've been spending probably, about 2.5, 3 years working on this. But just recently, since about September, I've been really deep into it. And as a result, the body is letting go of a bunch of stuff. So, I've had bad indigestion, I've gotten sick, and, that was my body finally saying, hey, listen, we really need just to take this week to just sit here. And as I told you guys last week, we were supposed to be leaving to go to Illinois for Thanksgiving, and they were going to stop in Lexington, Kentucky on the way back, and Nashville, Tennessee on the way back to see 2 friends of mine. And we weren't able to go because the universal joint in my mother's car went out. And when I called my friend Julie Rust up, she started laughing because she said, very interesting that the universal joint, the universe, said you're not going. And then the very next day, I was sick. And so these are signs that we want to pay attention to because all around us is stuff that's telling us. The universe is talking to us at all times. God is talking to us at all times, and it's done through symbols, not always as a voice in your head. But we have to look at that because everything around us is mirroring back to us something that's going on inside of us. And that's the basis of what we're going to be talking. Part of what we're going to be talking about with Lisette coming up when she comes on at 1:30. Um, you know, from her experience of taking care of an Alzheimer's patient and the difficulty of that, and the mirrors that it mirrored back to her, and how she found a state of being during that time. She'd had several experiences up to that point, but this is where she really found a sense of presence in the now, the moment. And she woke up, basically. And so all this stuff seems very mysterious, and we could read it on books, but we really got to practice it. And most of us, are looking for that judgment of what to, get rid of. And in the metaphysical world, they're trying to get rid of blocks. And what I say is that transmute them, because what they are is fear. And if you transmute them from fear into love, or lead into gold, then you're going to achieve a golden mind. And that golden mind will help you reach that level of constant awareness. And so look at everything as an experience, but you only follow what's going on inside of you, that inner spirit. And so it was interesting because when I actually sat down and I thought to myself, okay, I'm sick, and I heard, it's time for you to sit and rest, dear one. That was my inner voice telling me it's time to relax. This morning I was going to go and broadcast the show where I would have, equipment and all that kind of stuff. And I'm still not feeling good this morning, so I didn't want to get other people sick. And so I decided that I was going to stay home and broadcast from home. And, I've got that capability of doing that so I could rest. These are the things that you really want to take into consideration. But the mind poison, as I would say it, some of us would say, no, I got to go in because I got to be able to have all the equipment. I need to make it perfect. I can't have any mistakes. I can't be here by myself. And and I was doing that for a while with the show. But the reality is that poison blocked me from being here where I needed to be, resting, relaxing, enjoying the connection I'm going to have with the guest, enjoying the connection I'm going to have with you guys, the listeners. And, because I would have been tired, exhausted, and not feeling good. So these are just some things you want to think about, because what all your things are going on in your body is teaching you about listening and being in balance. And you're in balance and you're listening because it's like you're riding a cosmic wave. And that cosmic wave is telling us where to lean. It's telling us where to go. It's telling us, to fall back. It's telling us to lean forward. It's like you're on a surfboard surfing cosmic energy. And, our judgments are what gets us to fall off of the surfboard. Now, I really want you to think about that for a second, because if we were to talk about a surfboard, let's switch it to a bicycle. Think about when you learned how to ride a bicycle. And in that moment, you had to have some faith that you were going to be able to balance that bicycle. Or if your parents were grabbing onto the back, you had to have faith that they were going to hold onto the back. I remember my experience of learning how to do that. My mother was walking behind me and making sure I was safe and secure. Well, at one point, it was either my mother or my uncle finally let go of the bike. And I was riding without their help. And then when I turned back around, I realized that they weren't there. And they said, look, all that fear you had of falling, you just did it. You just did it. So that's the same way our spiritual experience, our spiritual existence is. If we stay in balance, if we stay in this moment, and we have faith in who we are, that we're going to stay in balance, that we're going to go here and we're going to go here, then we'll never fall. Or when we do fall, we'll learn from it. We'll get back up, brush our wounds off, and go forward. We'll be right back. Okay, and we're back. Just a couple things. We were just talking about being in balance with yourself, and it's just a couple more pointers I just want to put on there. I just want you to take a second to feel your energy and take a deep breath in, always through your nose, always through your nose. Breathe it all the way down into your toes. You're going to have to use your imagination with this, but breathe it all the way into your toes. And then exhale out. Do it one more time. Inhale, exhale. I want you to do it with the intention of just relaxing your body and feel it relaxed. Okay. Now that you've gotten to kind of a relaxed state, I want you to think about all the things in your life that cause you stress. So, it could be money, it could be the government, it could be your job, your spouse, your other half, your projects, life, any of those things. Anything that you can just want you to feel your body. Pay close attention. Now right now you might feel your body going from that kind of relaxed state and feeling, tensions in your body, pains in your body, or a twitch in your body, or whatever. That's what happens when we focus on things and that causes tension. But now, what I want you to do is I want you to take control of that, and I want you to declare that you have dominion over that stress. So I want you to relax again, and I want you to think about the most stressful thing, and I want you to picture it right in front of your eyes. It's like it's happening right there in front of you. And so as you're looking at it, you're doing the deep breathing, you're relaxing, you're facing it. You're allowing that tension to subside, and you're allowing yourself to go back into flow. This is how we change things within ourselves. Because that tension feeling we had before, we are grand beings, and that tension goes out into the cosmos, into the universe, and it affects everybody around you. And what happens is those tensions is where you feel small, where you have no power, where you feel a victim, enslaved to it. I have to pay these bills, and I never have enough. I'm out of work, and right now the economy is so horrible. So what you do is you start seeing yourself in the highest and best. Start declaring who you are. I am debt-free. I am free. And now what I want you to do is, as you're breathing, I want you to feel that energy of, let's just picture $100 bills or gold or whatever, flowing from inside of you and out of you. So it's like a constant flow. Most of us, when we think about money, we think, well, that'll be nice to have. Or people that are very wealthy, they're trying to think of how they're going to keep it. Some of them go and flow with it, like Oprah is one of them. But what I'm trying to get at here is that if you are not in flow with this, because you are the whole, we are all one, if you constantly feel like you don't have enough, or if you're just attracting it into you, you're not in flow with it. You want to flow it in, flow it out. Give, take. Give, take. Give and receive. Give and receive. It's a flow. And you can do this with anything. But if you have a just bring it in because I need it, then you might bring it in temporarily. But what you're going to find is that that's going to be short-lived. So you want it to give and receive. Give and receive. Give and receive. I have friends that I buy them dinner. Like, I don't really want you to buy me dinner. Well, why? they have trouble receiving. But if they were to buy me dinner, it would be okay. Because they don't want to feel like they're putting upon me. But if I've offered, I've offered. Just some things to think about. And as we're, looking at the current world, we can really change a lot of things in ourselves by looking at how we feel inside. Just a real quick announcement. Some of you might already know from Facebook or other things. I am a part of a play called Best Said Dead, written by my publisher and editor, Todd Kottmeyer-Kaczynski and Steve Hammond. You can check out that play at millionhugs.com. It's millionhugs.com/bestsaiddead, the play. And the reason why I'm bringing this up right now is that we are right now selling tickets for $10 if you bring 2 cans of food, a minimum of 2 cans of food to the night of the play. But you can check out the information on it on there. It is a really awesome play, and Todd has done it, and Steve have done a really good job with it. So I wanted to bring that up before we switch over and bring our guest on. I'm going to read her website here because I think this is really cool what she says here. And she's talking about difficult people have been, for most of us, the bane of our existence. They annoy, hassle, and irritate us and provoke various degrees of unhealthy reaction. What few of us have realized is that they also mirror our own dysfunctional mental states and provide an opportunity to heal them. In Difficult People, Lisette Larkins tells how providing care for an Alzheimer's patient clearly showed her the inherent resistance in the way every mind objects to what is. It's the root cause of all our anguish and mental suffering. By observing its operation in her difficult person, the author clearly saw the same mechanism alive within herself. The result is an intensely personal exploration of how everyday problems and the deep, difficult people in our lives can act as a catalyst for spiritual awakening. For Lisette Larkins, it was by being totally present and non-reactive that she could provide her patient with the needed care. This eventually became, for her, a chronic state of well-being, one which we can all attain by practicing presence. And so we're going to be bringing her on the show here shortly. And her website, if you want to check it out, is lisettelarkins.com. So we're going to take a break, and we will be right back and bringing her on the show. I'll be calling her on the break. Thank you. Okay, and we're back, and that was Julia Rust and her audible insight on Be Like the Rose, and Leah Clark and her song I Am. But I've got some exciting news. We've got Lisette on the line from California. And how are you, Lisette?
Great, thank you, Jeremy.
Awesome. So I just I told you guys a little bit what was on her website, but I wanted to read the other just a little quote she has here on the press kit that was given to me. It says, "This book serves as an alarm clock. It's not that you're running late. It's just time to wake up because you've been asleep long enough." And when I read this, I got all the information from about Lisette a couple months ago. I thought, wow, it is time for us all to wake up and take, and just be, step into who we are and let our soul take over and let our soul really guide us. And it got me really excited about having her on the show. But to tell you a little bit about her, Lisette has had extraordinary paranormal experiences since childhood. Their import was to reveal to her the possibility of chronic state of well-being. She has published 3 books about 3 experiences, but it wasn't until she discovered the work of Eckhart Tolle on being present that a clear path presented itself. She began to apply these principles in her work as a publishing sales director, author, and spiritual guide. She was guided in 2007 to take a job as a caretaker of a late-stage Alzheimer's patient. An experience that pushed her into a permanent state of presence and allowed her to formulate the principles expressed in Difficult People. And so, without further ado, we have Lisette here on the line with me. And, You know what I find interesting about that is you were a sales director and then you became a caregiver.
Yes, I had an unusual situation in which I was both a sales director at the same place for the same company and concurrently while I was an author. So I was a published author for that publishing company. And I traveled around with Bob Friedman, the publisher, but also my partner. And so, I had two different hats. I was an author. I had a lot of speaking engagements. I was doing quite a bit of radio, but also a sales director. So, because we published spiritual books, metaphysical books, excuse me, my puppy's barking in the background. I hope she's not disturbing.
No, that's fine.
Because we published spiritual books, my job involved dealing with a lot of authors who were experts in this field of spiritual growth. And what I noticed consistently, and I include myself in this, is that although we, were so-called spiritual practitioners and we were all on the path and we were all practicing being more aware, it didn't seem that we were any more peaceful inwardly than anybody else. And it had a great effect on me. It actually served to I became somewhat discouraged by it initially. This was back in 2005. And I also noticed my own mental patterns and thought, it seemed almost as though it didn't make a difference whether I was a spiritual practitioner or so-called spiritual practitioner or not. I was still subject to mental suffering, almost to the same degree that everybody else was. Granted, maybe I wasn't pounding my fist on the steering wheel during gridlock, but I might have had an internal reaction. So this is when I decided to just leave. I left that role and I decided to stop writing and I stopped speaking and I kind of quit my role as author and I quit my role as sales director and I moved back to California and I just didn't know what I wanted to do. And although I took a 2-year job as a manager for a very busy medical practice for 2 years, a high-paid position, even that, at one point I said, this is not me. This is not what I want to do. And I began to pray and earnestly go within, asking that my final spiritual teacher would present himself. One, I kind of assumed it would be a man. And two, I assumed it would be some wise elder from perhaps India, or I was ready to kind of give it all up and do whatever it took.
Right.
And I was very earnest about this. I was asking for my true spiritual teacher, a real spiritual teacher, my final spiritual teacher to present himself and point me in the direction of my own awakening, spiritually speaking. And interestingly enough, during this, say, about, 4 months later, I noticed that, I was forgoing all of the normal conveniences of modern time. I decided I didn't need a cell phone. I didn't need a nice car. I was really paring down my life. But nonetheless, I still needed something. I needed food and whatnot. So I decided to take a part-time job, and I went online and found a job very close to my house, rather than engaging previously like I had a long commute. And there was a job there as a caregiver and a companion for a woman who had Alzheimer's. And I thought, well, okay, I could do this part-time because it's so close to my house that I can always pay my car insurance I had a little used car. I'd gotten rid of the new car. And so I showed up for the interview, and she was furious, and her husband nonetheless hired me. So I started, and I was her caregiver and companion, and I ran the household, and she loathed me. She loathed the sight of me. She didn't want me there.
Oh, wow.
Her husband had hired me, and I was there to kind of keep an eye on her. At that point, she was still rather high functioning. She was still playing in golf tournaments. She still had her driver's license. She could drive. But I was there to kind of watch over her shoulder. Once in a while, she'd leave a pot burning on the stove. Things like that.
Right.
And it was very difficult because she hated me. There were moments in those first few weeks where she didn't seem to hate me, but she still had this underlying disdain for any idea of help. She bristled at the notion that she had Alzheimer's. She was in complete denial about the diagnosis. It was never discussed. It was not acknowledged. And so I then became the recipient of all her rage. And I set out, and I thought, wow. And soon, well, it wasn't very long, I started to realize that she was the spiritual teacher who had been sent to me. And so normally we think, we assume that our spiritual teachers will be these wonderful, wise, holy men or women who are themselves filled with peace and who will point the way to our own awakening. And the funny thing is that somebody who is difficult, as Jeanette was, somebody who is filled with everything that we ourselves are trying to dissolve, anger, resistance, fury, jealousy, regret, paranoia, fear for the future, all of those mechanisms are alive within us. And so when we behold them in our difficult person, we can actually use them as a very powerful and potent spiritual practice, in her case as my spiritual teacher, where I would be able to notice those mechanisms alive within me too. So, of course, I concluded that it wasn't just she who was inflicted. I, like her, to some degree had Alzheimer's. The mechanism was alive, albeit without the diagnosis. And that was when I was deeply humbled and dropped to my knees and thought, how has it come to this, that in the moment when I perceive her fury and I inwardly have a thought, wow, she's just such an angry woman.
Yeah.
And then noticing her resistance, I noticed that I was doing the same thing. I was resisting her. She would resist the traffic, she would resist her disease, and I would resist her reacting to that. So we were the same.
Wow. We're gonna, I want to hold that thought. We're gonna be back after this break, and we're gonna have a song from Leah Clark and Julie Rustin. We'll be right back. All right, guys. So we're back, and I am definitely gonna start recording the outtakes on the commercial breaks because the best conversations happen on this show during the break. Well, really good conversations that happen on the break. And what we were just talking about is because I was telling Lisette about my experience, and I don't want to get really heavily into that, but she was mirroring back and she was helping me realize, wow, I had this experience of I went through this experience to humble me, and then she was given a really solid explanation on what happens why things happen in our life and why people are brought into our life from our soul. And so I had to cut her off because we were coming back, but it was just a really good conversation that we were having on the break. And so I don't know if you could explain a little bit what we were talking about when we were talking.
Sure. Jeremy, it's about recognizing that the egoic mind, which is part of the analytical mind, has taken us over. And so we have not become aware of the fact that whereas the analytical mind as a tool was supposed to have been a tool that we would pick up to solve problems and then put back down. So we would alternate between periods of mental busyness and mental stillness. But almost not all of us, with the exception of maybe 3 people on the planet, have it reversed. Eons of evolution and the way of a habit of being in which the busy mind has now become the master of the house. And instead of being a tool that we use, the tool has taken us over, and we now defer to mental thought like a bad cocaine addiction. And so we assume that the thoughts that we think are true and also that they are us, that they are sponsored by the power of ourselves, but they're not. And so it's important to recognize what we are all up against as we really progress on our spiritual paths. Because without recognizing the degree of the momentum that the analytical mind has over us, not to mention the fact that as soon as we, our true selves, pick up and use effective spiritual practice to quiet that mind. That the ego is like any near entity. It wants to survive. It has its own momentum, and it wants to continue its role. It likes it. It likes being in charge. It's like any egoic narcissist.
Right.
It loves the role. And so it's not just going to quietly go into the background and go, oh, excuse me, I'm sorry for overstaying my visit. No. So as soon as we pick up effective spiritual practice, which we can go through really quickly at some point, it quiets it. It does not like the feeling of being dethroned, and it recognizes its impending dissolution, and it will never, ever cooperate with its own undoing, ever. So at first it resists it. It tells you why you shouldn't do it. It tells you there's other things to do. It's not effective. Quieting the mind isn't necessary. It's too hard, on and on and on and on. And then, interestingly enough, as we begin to make progress, it often will say, okay, I got this. I got it now. This is really, it's happening. I can't deny it. And it then will attempt to co-opt it for its own use, which is why you see so many so-called spiritual teachers who have indicators that their ego may be a little bit running the show more than maybe you would think that it would.
Right.
So it's an insidious process, the ego, and it wants to survive. And that's why in this book that I just did, Difficult People, I spent, 2 or 3 or 4 chapters outlining this process and what we are up against with respect to this near demon, this near entity, the egoic mind, and how it will not go quietly into the background. And every trap that there is, it is so cunning and devious that it will continue to undermine all spiritual gains.
I have a friend that calls that the beast within us.
Yes, right.
The ego. And she says you have to love the ego as you're going through that process, because exactly what you're saying is that if we were to try to, stifle it or get rid of it, it's not going to go quietly.
Right. It's kind of like, picture yourself being in the grocery store with a raging 2.5-year-old screaming for a lollipop. Meeting it with that same behavior doesn't work, of course.
Right.
You can't, squash it quiet. But we can meet it with the stillness that leaves it, speechless, because that inner power is within us. We don't have to go anywhere to find it. We don't have to do anything to get it. All we have to do is uncover it from where it already is. And we do that through, of course, the practice of mental stillness.
Right. Yeah, and quieting the mind. Now, what are some of the things that you, obviously, your patient, the person you were a caregiver for was not pleasant with you. How did you, I know that you found peace within that, but what were some of the processes you did to...
I went out and bought a stopwatch, like a marathoner stopwatch. It was actually a watch that marathoners use to train, that runners use, or athletes use. And I learned how to set it for every 9 minutes while I was awake. And the reason why I did this is I started to see Jeff's mental processes. That was the woman who had Alzheimer's. Her name was Jeanette. And as I started to observe her, I started to have inkling that perhaps my own mind worked the same way. Although perhaps I didn't have the diagnosis, and perhaps I was a little bit more in control of myself. But nonetheless, I started to suspect that she just was a mirror for the way my mind and everybody else's mind actually works. So I bought this stopwatch, and I set it to go off every 9 minutes. And when I was in a loud environment with her, I couldn't hear it. So I took it off and put it around my neck with a chain.
Right.
And every time that the alarm would sound, I would just simply do one thing. I would take notice of my mind. What was it doing? What was it thinking? And what I discovered was shocking and startling. Without exception, my mind, like everybody else's, except for the 3 people on the planet, perhaps, my mind was having either thoughts of the past, regretting the past, comparing the present to the past, etc., or I mind was constantly on the past or the future. Worrying about the future, worrying about the past, wondering about an uncertain past and future, and trying to figure out how I could survive this unpleasant moment right now. So I was shocked because I noticed I shifted the focus from Jeanette's mental disease. I was still caring for her, but no longer was I focusing on the dysfunction of her process. I was focusing on my own, and that helped me truly to recognize the very sad state of affairs.
Wow.
So before I did anything, I wanted to see how bad it really was. And I wore that watch for about a year. And interestingly enough, I started at the same time a practice. So as soon as I noticed what the alarm would sound, I would notice my busy thoughts. I would notice my inner anxiety, even though outwardly I had enough social decorum that I wasn't acting out like she was. I wasn't yelling and screaming and pounding and all that. But inwardly, I was distressed. So I would notice it and I would start accessing the 3 gateways. And do we have a chance to go through those?
Yeah, we have another couple minutes on this.
Okay, I'll quickly outline them. They're first described by Eckhart Tolle, the wonderful spiritual teacher. And I began to approach those as they were my lifesaver. That's all that I had to keep me peaceful. And so the 3 gateways are, the first one is the inner energy field of the body. The second one is the breath. And the third one is the present moment itself. Now, it doesn't matter which one you use, they all take you to the same place, which is a quieting mind, which allows us to come into alignment with this perfect moment of now. So, for example, we were driving along in the car, Jeanette would start to yell and scream about something, and I would immediately access the first gateway, which is I would place my attention on the inner energy field of the body, which is that warm inner sensation inside my body. You can feel it in your hand, you can feel it in your inner core, you can feel it anywhere. Sometimes there's a tingling, sometimes there's not, sometimes there's a sensation, it doesn't really matter. But the point is when you put your attention on it, that inner essence is actually the pure life force. So when we move our attention from outer circumstances to inner life force, an amazing thing happens. The mind starts to quiet. And peace is found. Let's just say it doesn't work, or we can't access it, or we can't feel it, or it doesn't appeal to us. The way is we take a deep breath, and we allow the breath to so-called take us inside to the same place, the inner energy field of the body. So we can use breath, take a deep breath, and we immediately take our focus away from the thing that's distressing us, and instead onto that pure life force which is within us, and the breath embodies it. And again, the mind completely stills. And interestingly enough, no matter which of those 2 gateways you access, the inner energy field of the body or the breath, it immediately takes you to this present moment of now. And of course, we can go there directly by using the 3rd gateway, which is the present moment. But sometimes people have trouble with that, particularly when they're in a dire emergency. If somebody's screaming and yelling or there's an emergency, it's hard to find the perfection in the moment of now when it seems to be that something is so-called going. But that's what the first 2 gateways where they lead you to, which is the perfection of this present moment.
Yeah. Very cool. Because you're in the present moment, your breath. Wow. And
the mind quiets. So what we're doing is when that happens, it's not just a matter of, these are not just semantics we're dealing with, because of course we've heard about the breath, the yoga, we know about, body-mind practices, but it hasn't really made a big difference to us. So the idea is to make our daily routines a meditation, rather than our morning meditation and our yoga class to be a meditation only. It's about taking these inner stillness practices during our regular daily life, and then we continue to practice this and do this more and more every day until it becomes a habit, and then it's a normal way of living.
So you're exercising a muscle, really. It's like
yes, and our inner essence becomes unobscured from where it has been hidden all along. And so suddenly we are who we are supposed to be.
In our purest sense. Wow. All right, guys. We'll be right back after this song. All right, guys, and so we're back. And on the break, I had asked Lisette to talk about some things that maybe we haven't covered on the show, in this next segment, and she come up with a great, subject to talk about. And so I'm going to kind of let her talk, discuss what she wanted to discuss from the book. And so I'm just going to turn it over to her really quick. Well, for however long it takes. So
Jeremy, one of the obstacles that I found that gets in the way of finding inner peace is any type of strong role that we identify with. So, for example, between 2002 and 2006 or so, I was an author. I considered myself to be an author, and it was an identification that I had. And when I noticed that it started to pick up a life of its own, and it was preventing inner peace because I was, I had thoughts about, well, what am I supposed to be doing, or where should I be, or, what's my next activity around it. That's when I just kind of walk away from it. So now, that does not mean that one, of course, cannot be engaged in activities with great interest and passion. So now I've written another book many years later, but the difference is that I don't have the role of author associated with it. So it's kind of like if I decide to do the dishes in my house, if I eat a meal and do the dishes, I don't normally pick up the role of I'm now a dishwasher. I just do the dishes. Well, the problem, the struggle with the ego is the ego loves to pick the role up if it's something that meets its goals. And, of course, the ego's goals are continually to find a way to uphold its moral superiority over others. That's the role of the ego. It wants to feel morally superior, and, in fact, it has a life of its own and needs to feed regularly. So every 3 days, 4 days, once a week, once a month, you will see it in other people before you see it in yourself. The ego comes out to feed on some kind of a problem. And sometimes it's easy to find something that it objects to. If there's somebody like Jeanette in the room who's furious and pounding her fists on the table, then of course we can feel, wow, that person's out of control. That's also a way that it feeds on negativity. But sometimes there's nothing wrong. There's nothing to complain about. So it will start inventing things. And we all know people like that, where even when it's a beautiful day, they'll always find that one thing that they can complain about. That's nothing more than the ego that comes out to feed on negativity. So it helps to be in recognition of the goals of the ego as opposed to the goals of the inner being. And they are opposite. Because the goals of the ego love strong identifications and strong roles that uphold a sense of superiority, it's always looking for those roles and labels which help it to feel special. So that feeling of feeling special is what we can notice in ourselves. And it's a way of being in the culture. It's not like it's just something bad. Every single one of us is subject to those kind of movements of the ego. So in our spiritual practice, all we do, we don't judge it. They're alive within every one of us. We just look at it. We just observe it. So I observe that in myself. And this time when I wrote a book, I was careful to not pick up this strong role of author and then kind of strut around with this, well, I'm an author role. And the trouble with that, of course, is it keeps the mind busy. And when it's busy, then we're not still, and then we're going to lose the peace. We're going to lose inner peace. So it's not just a matter of, well, I'm a spiritual student and I don't want to have an ego. No. The idea is that whenever the ego is running strongly and it has its fingers spread throughout the different areas of our life, it necessarily induces mental suffering. And I don't want any more mental suffering.
Right.
I've had enough of mental suffering. So it's very important to allow us to observe those mechanisms alive within ourselves when we see little tidbits of that. And then we just go, I see that mechanism trying to gain a foothold within me. And I just let it go. And so I can talk with you on the radio, Jeremy, but I will be conscious of the fact that the ego is not going to come along. Let it stay in its own little battle with itself, and I will continue to allow it to dissolve quietly and peacefully.
Right. Right. So you, the author, became a label of the ego. You know,
it did for me.
Yeah. And then, you know, it was almost a sense of entitlement or empowerment, I guess is a better word. But you got so wrapped up in that you missed all the other stuff probably going on. You know,
yes, and of course, we can have egoic roles in areas that we don't normally consider. Parenthood is a perfect one. We get taken over by the roles of our children's accomplishments or our own youth. I mean, that's pretty common when our beauty, or we have physical fitness we use as a way to feel special about ourselves.
Right.
So there's no limit to what we use. Dieting, body image, hair. In my book I describe, I had one with my own hair. I was fixated on the color, the length, the texture of my hair, and when I recognized how bad that was, I went and cut it all off and stopped coloring it. And for me, that was huge because, to live in Los Angeles where, outer appearances are very important and you don't let your hair go.
Right. Well, yeah, because, a lot of women do that. They dye it because they don't want to have the gray or the silver or whatever.
And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to explore myself without that need to be somebody. So I cut it all off and I stopped coloring it. And I had not just a few people call me and say, women friends say, Lisette, why don't you, let me take you to the hairdresser. It was crazy. And then I went on a long fast and some of my hair actually fell out. So I was I was great. It was one of those years where people were like, what is going on with you?
Right.
And so some of it grew back, strawberry blonde or whatever. But the point was I was I let that role go. A woman that needed to look a certain age or be a certain way. And I started to identify all those roles that kept me from who I really am, kept my ego engaged, which always induces mental suffering to some degree. And I started to let all those roles go.
Yeah. Wow. And what a beautiful thing. I mean, I know I've done it. I've looked. My thing is always that I have a little bit of men get pot bellies, and so I would do things. I'd wear layers of clothes to try to cover it, and then actually for a while I started to wear tighter shirts because I was gonna show it, and it was funny because the ego wanted to grab onto it and say, oh, I really shouldn't be doing that. I should cover this because nobody wants to see this. And it was me that didn't want to see it. So, what a cool journey to go through and experience yourself, really.
Yeah, it was just kind of allowing myself to, without judgment, we don't have to feel bad about ourselves because these mechanisms are alive within every single one of us. I didn't have to feel bad about myself, but I just started to look, oh yeah, I see. There the ego is grabbing my sleeve and it's tugging and it wants me to notice something. So here's would be a perfect example of the roles as a spiritual practitioner, a so-called role. The ego will say, look over there. There's something that you need to react to. There's something that should bother you. This is not right. Please resolve yourself to correct it. And the spiritual practitioner says, no. I'm not going to look at what you want me to notice. I am going to become aware of you becoming alive within me.
Wow. Yeah. Because they turn the focus back inward.
Right.
Beautiful. Beautiful. You ever have those moments where you're just processing And I had to stop for a second and process because...
We come in touch with our own inner stillness, and the mind doesn't know what to say to it.
Yeah. I think sometimes those are the greatest moments, to just be quiet for a second, or for a long second, So, guys, just to kind of tell you, I told you this before we started, when at the beginning part of the show. Lisette's website is lisettelarkins.com, so you can go and check out her website. It's got her contact information in here. You could email her on. There's a form to email her if you want, if you would like to. Her information will actually be on the Soul Talk website here within the next couple days. So if you wanted to go and check her out, and email her, and order her book, you could do that as well. Now, is it just where can they purchase the book? Is it through Amazon or? What's that? Okay, cool. Yeah, I definitely will. So, can they purchase it on the website as well?
There's a link there to Amazon.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so then.
You can also go to difficultpeople.net.
Yeah, and it looks like you have a list of your events, of radio shows you're going to be on, and different things on here as well. So there's a lot here that you can, get in contact with her and get to know her. Obviously, she's been a blessing for the show this morning, and helped me out, and I hope she's helped you guys out just listening to her. So you can go to Amazon.com and purchase her book, and so we'll be right back after this break. Okay, guys, and we're back, and I just want to take the last part of the show and talk about a few things, and I'm just really excited that we had Lisette on the line, and heard about her experience of the soul, and what a blessing to the show today. I'm just very pleased that she was on the show and talked about her experience and how she found peace inside of herself. And when we find that peace inside of ourselves, life changes. It becomes something, far beyond our imagination. Most of us, in a sense of struggle, we don't think that's even possible. And most of us are out there searching for answers to look and find out how we can get to that level. Lisette outlined a way to do that, and how she did that, and she outlines that in her book. So if you have a chance to buy it, and read it, definitely do so. Again, her website's lisettelarkins.com. So, anyhow, that's just I'm still processing some of the things that she said, and that that's the real blessing about this show, is that I've had my own experience, and I've grown from my own experience, but then souls like Lisette and the listeners and the people I interact with that are the listeners, I grow from that as well. So the spiritual teacher becomes the student, and that's the one thing that I really loved how she talked about. She was talking about our roles, our things that we grasp onto, and where she was talking about being the author, and she was really grabbing onto that title, or that way of being, that role. And that role kept her from experiencing other things, and then she went through a process of even being humbled, and having to grow from that. And so her and I shared some experiences on the breaks about how we had some similar experience, and how how cool that was for both of us that we shared that. But most of us go through that. We're going throughout life, and something comes to humble the ego. The ego is the one that says, I have to make sure my hair is perfect. I have to make sure I have the right clothes on. I have to make sure I have the right car. All those things are nice. Don't get me wrong, but it's our attachment to them, and our entitlement, and the fact that most of us look at that as something that empowers us, and those things aren't empowerment. Empowerment comes from how you feel inside. The chapter in the book that I'm writing right now, I'm talking about how, I would look at other people and think they had all the elements that I needed to be successful. And then one day I realized that I was successful because I said I was successful, not based on the rules of man and the rules of the way other people viewed it, but the way I felt about myself inside. And we have basic needs to be taken care of, but honestly, I've found that my needs are taken care of. And I have a roof over my head, and I have, beautiful friends and family, and, Lisette's experiencing that same thing. We look at things and say, well, I can't afford it. I'll never be able to do that because only the rich get that. And we're cheating ourselves. We're cheating ourselves because we have everything in us to be successful. There's not a part of you that doesn't have the element it needs to be successful because it's a choice. Happiness is a choice. Success is a choice. And then you take the steps it takes to get there. The universe says, well, you want to do that, you have to go this way. Step this way. I'll take you there. And there's an experience and a journey that takes us there. And every step of the way, something happens, and you just look at it as excitement. What most of us do is we look at, we just want to be from A to Z, and we don't want to experience all the steps in between. And what happens is that, we miss all the excitement that comes from that. I decided that I wanted to help people and be able to teach them happiness. But I had to experience the steps to find my own happiness, and every day I'm learning more about that. Every day I'm expanding my consciousness and growing as a person, as a spiritual being, and as a soul. And every day I get an experience that helps me practice that. It's like Lisette was saying, when she was saying that, I can get, our ego comes out and has an opportunity, is presented an opportunity to get stuck, basically. And that's our opportunity right then to look at it and process it and understand what our ego wants to grab onto and be negative about. That's our opportunity to discover it and let go of it. And, I'm just, these are the things that are going on within the world. I don't see the world the way some people see it. Some people see the world as a very dark and sinister place. I don't see it that way. I see things as opportunities. And yes, sometimes my ego tries to grab on. And I have to look at that, and I have to let go. Or I have to grow from it. And so, we want to really practice that on a daily basis. And the only thing we have to follow is our soul. And our soul guides us every step of the way. It tells us where to go. It tells us what direction to turn in. It has all the elements that we need to find that inner peace. And I can honestly say that through a lot of difficulty, I found inner peace. And then when I fall out of inner peace, then I recognize it because I realize that struggle that's going on inside of me is a mind poison. It's the ego trying to grasp onto it and go back into struggle. But I practice too much. And everybody can do this. Everybody. Everybody has the capability of finding that inner peace. And Lisette outlined the fact that she discovered it with a patient that has Alzheimer's. And how angry that woman was that she was her caretaker. And how upsetting that was. And it was a part-time job that she was doing. And she went from being a high-up sales director at a publishing company. And, so she had a certain amount of worldly success. And, through those steps, she discovered a deeper person. And she discovered a lot about herself and what's really important and what really brings happiness and joy to her. And then if we step forward and once we understand that, if we have success in the world, that's okay too. And so when we're ruled by it, when we don't understand where we're at, when we're empowered by that and not by what's going on the inside of us, that's where we get caught up in the addiction. That's where we get caught up in missing out on the opportunity. So if you're sitting there and things aren't going so well right now, or you're not where you want to be, just understand that all you have to do is take a step. And as you take that step in that momentum of going in that direction, the universe will bring you everything else, every opportunity. And then you get the blessing and the gift of deciding which opportunities you're going to act on. And how exciting is that? Because then life becomes something completely different. It becomes what all of us want. It becomes joy and happiness. So, some of you, Lisette is going to be sending me a couple copies of the book, and I'm just going to put it out there. If you guys want to email me on Facebook, you can, or you can email me at my private email at jmcdonald1974@gmail.com. You can also email me off the Soul Talk website at soultalkradio.org. And whoever the first couple people to email me, I will send you a copy of the book. Make sure that you provide an address for me to send it to, and so I can get that off to you as well. So we got about another 20 seconds here in this segment, so we're going to go into a break, and then we'll come back and wrap up the show. Thank you. Okay, and we're back, and that was first song was One World Revolution, The Power of Love, and the second was Sweet Oblique, Only When I See You. As you guys know, the V109 has switched its format to playing independent artists, local independent artists from around the country. So if you know any musicians that want to be featured on V109 FM, definitely contact myself or Vicky. You can contact me through Facebook, or again, I give you my email address, or go to the soultalkradio.org, and there's a form on there to be able to email me. So, just something to think about. Sorry about that. I locked the mic. Anyways, I just kind of recap. I was just stating that I met a woman on Facebook named Michelle, and what was very interesting about this is that she 3 years ago, I was in meditation and I was told I would meet somebody out in Arizona that worked for Indian Affairs, and that I was going to be doing something with the Indian Affairs or Indian reservations or something like that. And sometimes when you get this is like we were talking about with our ego. Our ego wants to grab onto it, and it's like, when is this going to happen? And you have to let that go sometimes, and because you just have to, because you'll try to force it. And so I remember I was telling my friend Virginia about it, and she said, oh, and at the same time she had met a woman that lived on the Navajo reservation. And what was really cool about it is I felt that person would be out in New Mexico or Arizona, somewhere along those lines. And come to find out, Michelle works for the Indian Health Services, and she is the friend that Virginia met a few years ago that lives on the Navajo reservation. And on top of that, she lives about 2.5 hours from Albuquerque on the Arizona side. And so I'm sitting here, and what's even a lot really cool about this is that she's friends with my friend Carla Goddard. And, I write a guest post on Carla Goddard's blog every month. And I'm like, I was so excited because I was like, are you kidding me? And I just got tickled pink about it, the synchronicity of it, because people are really coming together. And why that is kind of important to what we were talking about in the show is that I had to be ready to talk to her. I had to be ready to interact with her. And, because, 3 years ago, I wasn't ready to do that. And what she wants to be able to do is she wants to bring spiritual teachers out to the reservation and do a conference out there. And I just thought that was really cool. And so Carla was telling me, she goes, yeah, she wants to bring spiritual teachers out there to do a conference. And this is something that Virginia told me for a while.